Hi everyone, it's Blake again with ChessPathways.com, back today for another game analysis video from one of our members. Once again, to sign up, totally free, just visit ChessPathways.com. So let's get started. This player had the black pieces, and the game starts with a Scandinavian defense, and white plays e5 here. And already they made a very interesting comment. They said that when they play the Scandinavian defense, e5 is very annoying to deal with. Now, e5 does result in types of positions that most Scandinavian defense players might not be as familiar with the more closed center, because they're used to, of course, white taking and getting their queen out. But I don't think e5 is a very good move, because it really gives black a better version of some other black opening choices against 1e4. So let's take a quick detour here and talk a little about that. Let's look at other common openings that feature the white pawn on e5 and the black pawn on d5. So after e4, let's say black plays e6, the French defense. Now after d4, d5, let's say white chooses e5, the advanced variation, and black strikes back at the center with c5, you get this same kind of structure here with these pawns, but the light bishop is really locked in by the pawns, and that's one of black's biggest problem in the French defense. This light squared bishop is really hemmed in by those central pawns. Now let's go back after e4 and say that black doesn't want that. They want this same kind of light squared pawn structure, but they don't want their bishop being locked in. Well, that's the Caro-Kann, right? So you play c6, and after white takes the center and you play d5, and let's say white advances this pawn. And now you have the same kind of plan, but you want to get your bishop out first. So you play bishop f5, and now you're going to play e6, and then you're going to play c5 later to fight back for the center in some lines. But this is kind of slow, right? Because you have to play c6 and then c5 later, and if the center opens up, there's a big concern you can fall behind in development. That's one of the things white tries to exploit in this line. So what's the relevance of all this? If we go back to the game, after e4, d5, and e5, black plays c5 here, and we see black kind of gets the best of both worlds from the French defense and the Caro-Kann defense. They got to play c5 in one turn, they didn't have to play c6 and then c5 later, and their bishop's going to get out. They're not going to have to worry about locking their bishop in behind those light squared pawns. The bishop's going to get out, and they can solidify everything with e6 later. So this might not be exactly what a Scandinavian defense player is looking for, but of course the French and Caro-Kann are two mainstream openings with fine reputation, so if you're getting an even improved version on those, you definitely have reason to be happy here. That's why e5 is not a very popular move here, and I like black's response to play c5. So let's get to the game. White plays d4, black goes ahead and exchanges that pawn off because now they can develop their knight with tempo, and queen a4. Yeah, and white's having to move their queen around in the opening. It's kind of weird. It almost looks like, in some ways, a Scandinavian reversed. Black plays bishop to f5, getting that bishop out. They said they considered bishop d7, but they were worried about queen b5. So you're saying after bishop d7, you're worried about queen b5. Yeah, this forks your pawns, but look at what white's doing in the opening. They're moving their queen all around the board, and now they're trying to grab pawns. In general, you never really have to fear this, just losing one pawn when your opponent's just moving their queen all around the board. How I think I would handle this, I would just keep developing. They can take this pawn if they want it. Rook b8. Now I might even play knight b4, attacking the pawn and queen. I think white's kind of in trouble here. Black's going to develop very nicely, and white's just running. They have to move their queen yet again while all their other pieces are on the back rank, and black's starting to get all these pieces into the game. So I would not be worried about my opponent pawn grabbing like this. That said, bishop f5, I'm totally fine with that too. Knight to f3, and you played e6. h3, yeah, this doesn't look like a very good move for white. Wasting time in the opening. I talked about that in a couple other earlier game analysis videos. Bishop c5, bishop to d3, knight to e7. These moves look pretty logical. You're getting your pieces out and you're developing. And both players castle. White exchanges off that bishop for the knight. I think black has a very pleasant position here. And this e5 pawn could become a target. It looks like you could plan to try to surround it with queen c7. Although it's not too easy. White can defend it, but you also get play on the c-file, and just all your pieces are very active. Queen to g4. And here you played queen b6, and you gave this comment that you thought about playing f6, just trying to exchange off this annoying e5 pawn. So let's talk a little about that. In this kind of structure, when white has the pawn on e5, you sometimes do play f6 to tear it down, but there are some concerns with that. One is that if you play f6 and you have to recapture with say, a rook, at some point later, usually white has a pawn on d4, by the way, in this kind of structure. He doesn't here. But usually this e5 square can become an outpost for a white piece, and white can start putting pressure on the e-file against this backwards e6 pawn, which would no longer have any support here on f7. Of course, this is a totally different situation because white doesn't have the pawn on d4 like they have in a lot of these structures, in like a French defense or a Caro-Kann. So that is possible, but what I wanted to talk about is instead of viewing this pawn as, this huge annoyance, I would actually see it as a weakness for white. It's a kind of an extended pawn. It doesn't have any support. This pawn on d4 isn't here anymore. So instead of queen b6, although queen b6 looks quite nice too, putting pressure on two other pawns of white, I might have considered playing queen c7 and just trying to win this pawn. It's not too easy to see how white can defend this. For example, I think after bishop f4, we can go ahead and play knight f to d4, trying to exchange off this defender of the pawn. And it turns out that white's idea here to play bishop h6, which you might have been concerned about if you were considering this actually doesn't work here, which is pretty nice. You actually have the move f5, and this isn't going to turn out well for white. And you can analyze this out yourself if you want to, but just one sample line. If they take en passant, after rook takes f6, or sorry, not rook takes f6 right away, you throw this in first. Knight takes f3, and if they take with the queen, they break the pin, and you get to capture the bishop. If they take with the pawn, then after rook f6, white's just in big trouble here. Their king's busted open. This pawn's defended by your queen. Rook g6 is coming. The bishop's under attack. This is horrible for white. So with all that said, going back, after queen c7, if they play bishop f4 and you play knight f to d4, if they exchange, well, now it's going to be really hard to defend everything for white. This pawn's attacked 3 times now and only defended once, and I think you're just winning it. Also, b2 is under attack. So this pawn on e5 can turn out to be a target. This is a good lesson in when you see a pawn that's overextended or can't be easily supported by an enemy pawn, and that you can attack many times, try to think about if you can put your plan together around possibly winning that pawn. We noticed here we traded off a key defender of that pawn, that knight on f3, and we just used all of our active pieces to surround that pawn. And here, of course, bishop h6 still doesn't work because we can just win that pawn and g7's defended. So you would have had to calculate a little bit out to find this line. You would have had to, I'm sure a lot of players would be worried about bishop h6 if they played the line I recommended. So they would have to calculate it. And if they couldn't find, all of this, that's understandable. But the important thing is to know to look for it. And if you're not even thinking about ways to attack the e5 pawn, if you're only thinking of it as this big annoyance that you should trade off at the first opportunity instead of a pawn that is weak and that you can surround and attack, you would never even consider the idea. So it's just important to keep that in mind. Anyway, though, queen b6 is a fine move too, I believe. White plays knight to c3 and develops a piece, and knight c to d4. Yeah, and this is where both players start making a lot of mistakes. So white plays a3 and just completely ignores that their c2 pawn is under attack. So black scoops that up. Rook to b1. Yeah, and here the player with black thought that there was some kind of a pin here they could exploit, and they took on a3. So it's good they were looking for that, but of course this rook is defended. So that doesn't work. And then white just believed black. White played knight a4 and didn't capture that bishop. Yeah, this happens sometimes in chess, especially at faster time controls. You make some move that's a blunder based on some pin or something that doesn't exist, and your opponent just assumes, well, if they played it, it must be true and not bother looking for it. So they played knight a4 instead of trying to refute black's idea here. And here, black made another mistake. They played queen to b4. If they would just play queen to b5, I think they keep everything together now, because now there really is a pin. The knight moved away. Queen b4 tries to exchange off the queens, but it doesn't work actually because white has this very annoying move, bishop to d2, which the player who gave me this game mentioned. Bishop d2 does 2 things. It attacks the queen, and it unpins the rook because it gives the rook support, and now black is going to lose a piece. They thought they could get out of this by exchanging queens, but it turns out now they have two pieces under attack because by exchanging queens you brought this pawn in to attack that knight. That's why it's really important to calculate lines out to the end. This is an unusual kind of circumstance here where the exchange brought another attacker onto one of your pieces, but if you weren't looking for that, there's no way to find it unless, you're paying attention. So let's go back. After queen b4, white again missed the key move, bishop d2 this time, and they just exchanged off queens. So now we reach this position where black is just up 2 pawns. Black was able to capture 2 pawns. They made a couple mistakes to do so, but they went unpunished. And now black is just winning. Black's up 2 pawns. So let's see how the game continues. b3, rook f to c8. Black's just getting their pieces into the game. Knight to b2, bishop c3. Knight d3, a5. Yeah, this is the kind of position where there's plenty of good moves. I kind of like a5. I mean, it stops knight b4, but there's definitely more than one right plan now for black. So I don't want to spend too much time going through all the details of all the possibilities here. Black really is just completely winning, and the rest should be, as they say, a matter of technique. You know, you just don't make mistakes, exchange off the enemy pieces. Your 2 extra pawns are going to be plenty to win in any kind of endgame. Let's just see how the game goes, because black ended up losing this game, so I want to see what kind of critical mistakes they made. Because as long as they don't make any huge mistakes, they should be fine. Knight d4, yeah, you're winning, just exchange off pieces. Bishop e3. Okay, and there's a fork there. That's... yeah. So this is just really bad for white now. Now they're down. What are they down now? A couple pawns and the exchange. Black just won the exchange. F6. Yeah, I mean, you're so far ahead here, it doesn't really matter. But again, I don't like the mindset that this pawn is like this huge annoyance that should be traded off. Black's still talking about in their comments, trying to get rid of the annoying e5 pawn. I think you can just start marching your passed pawn. I mean, put the onus on white to do something about it. You're up so much here. F6, but again, I mean, it's not horrible. Knight to c5. Black starts doubling on this file. Okay, white won a pawn, but it comes at the cost of exchanging the rook. Rook e8. Oh yeah, okay, so what black's going to win even more material. The knight's hanging, and this the rook's coming down to the 8th rank, or the 1st rank to pick up that bishop. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and okay, this is obviously an easy win for black, and black said they lost on time, I believe, actually. Let's just quickly go to the final position here, where they said they lost on time. Yeah, wow. Okay, that's not what I expected when I heard that they lost on time. I thought there must have been some kind of complicated middle game situation that came up, but this is obviously the kind of position you can win by pre-moving, right? You just, scoop up the pawns, do exactly what I showed to do in my endgame video. Just do a rolling rooks checkmate or one of the basic checkmates. So it makes me wonder if this was some kind of blitz game or some kind of game with no increment, or how it's possible to lose on time here if it's not a blitz game. So I would definitely recommend at this rating level, if you're going to play blitz games, try to play games that have an increment so you don't just lose on time. There's always time to think. And really, I would definitely recommend playing longer games if you can, especially, for lower-rated players who are trying to build these habits. Again, there's nothing wrong with playing blitz. I know it's addicting. I play blitz all the time. But as far as playing a game and then trying to perform a serious analysis of the game, your returns there are significantly diminished if it's a blitz game, because there's going to be so many blunders like this. If you make a mistake in a long time control game, we can really sit down and try to figure out why and what's going wrong in your thought process and how to improve it. Whereas if you make a mistake in a blitz game, it's so easy to just dismiss it and say, oh, it's blitz, I had to make a move, so I made a move. There wasn't time to go through this thinking process. And that can build bad habits if you're not careful when you're coming up in chess. When you're not taking the time to go through the thinking process that I describe in my move-by-move guide to chess thinking, when you don't have the time to internalize that process because you're playing games that are too fast, that can really hurt you in the long run. So I'm wondering how much the time control might have shaped some of the other mistakes that were being made in this game. When we go back to that situation in the middle game, it was in this region of the board where there were 4 consecutive mistakes. Black made 2 mistakes in a row that could have lost a piece, and white didn't find the move to punish either of them. Again, I'm wondering if that was driven by time or, what other considerations might have been in play there. Anyways, the player did take the time to really provide some really nice annotations. I feel like I was able to really get into their thought process here. So I still wanted to reward that and make this analysis video. But definitely, I would recommend, if you're going to send me games to analyze, try to have them be longer time control games. I think it'll provide, much better discussions, much better insight into what's going wrong and what can be improved instead of just, the clock being such a huge factor. Thanks everyone for watching. I will see you again soon.